All right, good evening, everyone. All right, so recently the Namchak office reached out to me to ask me to give some kind of Dharma Talk explanation about making offerings and setting up an altar. So that's the main thing I want to talk about tonight. So generally when we talk about offerings, there are lots of different kind of categories of offerings we could talk about. There's something called outer offerings, inner offerings, secret offerings, offerings of suchness, actual offerings, mentally emanated offerings, and so forth. But the main thing I want to talk about tonight is what we call outer offerings. And so the reason why I want to talk about the outer offerings, which will be covered by something called the 7 kinds of offerings and then water bowl offerings, is because in the Nyingma tradition we have something which is called the 9 vehicles or 9 spiritual approaches, 9 levels of spiritual practice. And the outer offerings are something which are applicable and appropriate to be offered at every level of that practice. Whereas some of the inner offerings, such as what are called medicine, rakta, and torma, which are some of the inner offerings, are only applicable at the highest level of practice and not generally applicable. So I want to start off with the basis level. So it's very common to see a presentation of something called the 7 offerings, and you'll even see like for sale at shops things called like the 7 bowls, like sets of 7 bowls and so forth. So I want to talk about how did this idea of 7 kinds of offerings come about, and what's the reason for 7? So from one perspective, we could say that it has to do with the kind of customs and habits of the kind of world in which these offerings came from. From another side, we could say that during the time that the Buddha was alive, these were the customs, but they were also kind of blessed by the Buddha to be offering substances that you could use in your practice. So there's kind of 2 reasons, you could say. So when I say that it is the kind of custom or habit of a particular land or people from a land, the first place that Buddhism spread with Shakyamuni Buddha was in India, and then gradually it made it to Tibet. So these 7 offerings are kind of a part of the culture of India. So, like for example, people say that these days that this tradition of India that is represented by these offerings is even still exists now today. And you'll see that whenever an important person or a famous person is invited into like an Indian temple or something like that, even when His Holiness the Dalai Lama is invited into various temples and monasteries in India, the first thing they do is offer you water to rinse your mouth out with. And then secondly, they give you other water to wash your feet, or they wash your feet for you, like that. So the first 2 bowls of the 7 here, starting from this side, this one is either you could call it drinking water or mouth washing water, and the second one is for washing your feet, foot washing water. And then another thing that they do even now when a kind of important person comes, then they offer flowers, sometimes even just having flowers that they throw into the air as someone walks in. So that's the third, is the offering of flowers. And then the fourth here is incense. And so incense is just for making a pleasant scent when you're inviting someone in, or to bring that fragrance into the temple or to the person who you're inviting in. And so now the fifth is this. In Tibetan, literally they say butter lamp because that's how they make lamps in Tibetan, but it's like a candle or the offering of light. So it is to eliminate the darkness and bring brightness to the space. And so the sixth bowl here is scented water. And what this is different than, like the smell of the incense. Like the purpose is different. Like in traditionally in India, it was sandalwood. And the point of that is that India is very hot. And if you take sandalwood infused water or even just sandalwood powder and rub it on your skin, it gives not only a pleasant smell and pleasant fragrance, but it's also cooling. Then the seventh here, this is food. And so it's just, when someone comes over, you offer them some food, like that, simple as that. So this torma here represents food. So then the last one here, which actually becomes 8, we gave you 7, but this becomes 8, is actually music. So this is a musical instrument. This is 2 small cymbals here. So, pleasant sounds.
Jidani Chibana Din lay do, Dini, the Hapta na yelly do, but the Gawa yo, Mari Manja, Dini, the Ye, the Tamatilla, Dini, Roma, the Rohere, the Gawa yo, Maris, and Sundus.
So, you may be wondering, and I have wondered this before too, you guys always say 7 offerings, so why is there this 8th thing down here? And I also had that doubt, so I asked Chukwusanga Rinpoche, and he said, yeah, the general traditional thing is to say the 7-fold offering, but in a lot of offering prayers, there's always also the music, so we just include that also. So don't think it's contradictory. It's still like technically the 7-fold offering, but we often add the symbol. So sometimes, if you count to 7, this one will be missing. It'll be the first 7 without this one. But often you'll see this included.
Tindedo di komhi de dine di dune de tende cheni guo de zamba ta di peli kante cheni ji chena ta tenda ji tende cheni yeche tende din sha me jian yo re dia de chazang ma tende so so li ta mendo ta pe ta de zo man me zo me na ani di din di na la chu ji bo tende cheni yen jap se tende sha me de lukso ji dan cha yo res.
So then another thing that has happened in Tibet is that, for many people, they won't go through and set up the different offerings in each and every one, like flowers and incense and everything. They'll just put water into all 7 bowls as an offering.
아니 다 로자비 친구 다 친구 간주 친구라 친구지 로자와 나는 다 저도 좋아돼 저제 반대 아디히야 니 별이 펩디 디니 공 베지룽 비사자서 시디 잠바다 베데데야 사카토와자 아니 추티조 담베지 탕마 장마다 예락견데스도다 추틴데도 잠바 디 공이다 베지룽 바델라 디니 다 소남기 초소 엘리디 현바 강지 고사 말에 추직비 득사레스 텐데 백콩순 향데 잠바데 베델라다 단다지 베나베 김장 더 딘자 메게다 지아요 말데 김장레나다 딘자 차 링직보야 마인 바딘 힝아 텐데 지아니 대한 베니 맞다바다 힌다 지 효게 향 고모마히 텐데 지기어스.
And so then, the 7-fold offering came about just how I mentioned, but then how did it turn into a 7-fold offering of water, or offering of 7 water bowls? One of the most famous Indian masters who came to Tibet, his name is Joje Pelden Atisha. And when Atisha came to Tibet, Tibet's such a high place, high in the mountains, that the water is really, really pure, really, really clean. So when Atisha came, he said, in Tibet, for you to gather this accumulation of merit through your offerings, you only need to offer water because it's so pure. And so that became a tradition then in Tibet. And so you pretty much can't find a single household in all of Tibet that doesn't have like the 7 water bowls offerings set up. And not only 7, usually 4 or 5 sets of 7 bowls set up that they pour fresh every morning and then empty and clean the bowls every night. So they set that up fresh every day.
텐데체니 직제다 디 가르시에서 초진이야 디 딘데 컨디션 중에서나 되네 산제 향자도와 되네 lumbine도 요미 말아서 꾸타몬데 감부도 되네 초레레레다 콤바 딘딘 베자 아니 디 체인제체도 되네야 데 딘레세 텐데 안송게 요레스.
So another way of talking about the 7 offerings is it's said that when Shakyamuni Buddha was born in Lumbini, that there's a story that he was born and immediately upon taking birth he took 7 steps, and it's also said that the offerings represent those 7 steps, 7 for 7.
Di hienpa ta sanje chinji lab tenjik ta di goli hi hyakyo de ta lungpai komi hi jia ni sanje ta di chipa na din de dini di sanje ta chipi zesu chinji laba se de dini lai wangpo yaji dini di sanje chumde dele dini di chuying pu res chuying de pu wang de zamba dini di chipi ze chuying su chinji lab dini di lupya zuna rinji dini di hyapsi puon res de hyapsi puon zamba dini sanje chumde de gi hyapsi su
zuna rinji
luja zuna rinji
lui japo
ra ta thangbo de yin hin hyang de sa
So then I said before, though, that also there was like kind of two perspectives of how the 7 came about. One is through the kind of customs of the land. The other one is because the Buddha blessed them to be offering substances. So how did that come about? So one is that the stories go that Indra, who's like the lord of all the gods of ancient India, was said to have made an offering of water to the Buddha, of drinking water to the Buddha. And then the king of the Nagas, Sunarinchen, made an offering of like cleaning his feet. That's it.
디니디 세모 강가마세디 디니디 상제 좀 되들리 디니디 멘독 부샤르세
And then a young girl named Sankarsa,
강가마
Gangama, made an offering of flowers to the Buddha.
디니디 방조 치비타 히세도다 방조 치비타 히세 콩이 디니디
Bangzo, Sanakarsa word.
방다 콩랑기 민로레 야치다
No.
방조 치비 타히세다
Chubitashi.
어 디니 상제 좀 되들리 디니디 두괴도 부샤르세
And then there's another guy named Pangtsu Chubitashi, and he made the offering of incense.
디니디 야보스 세장미 디니디 상제지 차레 디니디 만메 부샤르 만메 부르스
Yapdi.
어
Sanjiki Yap.
야
And then the Buddha's father, the king Setsang, offered him a lamp.
디니 다 지시 야오디 랍가세도 디 지적 부샤스리도
Chisi Jopo.
지적 다 지세도
Then the king of the Gandharavas, this is another class of, ancient Indian mythological beings, made the offering of the like sandalwood infused water.
디니 김다 괴메세 디니디 상제리 샤세 부샤라
Chimtak Gumitse.
괴메세
Gumises.
김다 괴메세 진세지와
La.
자갈리 김다 괴메세 진세지오레
Mishi.
노래 다 김다 괴메 세슬람 헤디오더라 거기 디니디 상제리 샤세 부샤라
So then there's another guy. His name's Chimdak
괴메세
Gumise.
Yeah.
Sorry, these are just random names for you guys, probably. But anyway, he made an offering of food to the Buddha.
디니 가와라가 루세 디니 상제리 로마 부샤라 가와라가 루
Haga Lure.
루르리요
And
디랑 상제 로마 부르스
Then one Naga named Gawaluga, he made an offering of music to the Buddha.
디디 잠바디니 디다 된다 인지견증아서 디디 시시방아서 강다 부야여라 라마도 부야여라 이나인지 켄지 디디 존나 디부나 디양 바에 쳔보다 텐데 예그 줌제 찍데 디니 상제레 상제 야휴 값수 아니 상제 로마도 상제레 테부 디데 상제 치비제 수파 친질랍야 디잠바 디단다 디부나 디 믹사 캬바도 다 직접바데 참미다 텐데 디데데 줌제리 데레
So, there are so many things in the world that we could think of to make offerings of to the Buddhas and so forth, but it's considered that making these offerings is especially beneficial because when the Buddha was still alive in this world, his students made these specific offerings to him, and when they did, it said that the Buddha blessed them to be things that would be beneficial for people to offer in the future.
디 슈바다 딘디 디니디 다치 중림로데다 딘데로지 인사 딘데체네다 디도 쳬바데라 디니 쳬바데 부온데 잠바다 뇌보스디 잠바다 디 쳬바 부사디 아니 단네디조 아니 가레로지 고기요레스 디코센다 디 아니 지 소소리 주조르와예 딘데체나니 디니 미데조세 시기 쳬바 부사요레 아니 무이 쳬바 부사다요레 안 상당다 카레나 공좀버래 아 소소리 조르와 메나니 아니 지코란디 카레나나디 코피하나 디여레 이나야 링당체디나라 푸나 아니 아주 텔라히비 초아마가 조기레스인데 해요레스
And so then, in terms of these bowls, the kind of things that you would use to make the offerings in, you can actually use anything. But it said that if you have the wealth to do so, that it's better to use like a fancier substance, that it is more meritorious for you if you like according to your status, not to go like way outside of that, but like to the point that you can't afford. Like if you can't afford something and you buy something really cheap, it's less beneficial than buying like a nicer one. Anyway, the point is if you have the money, you can get bowls that are made out of solid gold or silver or copper or bronze or other kind of fancy materials. But otherwise, you can also just offer whatever you have. Like you can buy some simple little glass bowls or plastic bowls at the store like that.
Then the Diana Tranga, they are Egypt of Boo Gaps, in chicken, you do and the Boo, choking Mara, Tender Maracatze, Penadorci, Tizoli, the other Chatun's Hugh Cup to the Tonta Mamma, the Chuzama, the Buviduase. They did them by chicken, and doing you poke on a was at the Jeremidus.
And also, it's not necessarily the case that you can only offer 7. You can put however many you want. Like there is this tradition of 7, but like Dorje doing the carriages?
Dorje doing to the Benaji on the Tongue do the Hugh, on the Chatun's a Hugh Cup.
Oh, okay. So like in Bodh Gaya at the temple around where the Buddha attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya in India, they take like small, just like paper cups, drinking cups, and set like hundreds or thousands of them up around the temple as offerings, as water offerings. So it's not only the case that you should just only make 7. Like you could make as many as you want.
That's about the Chicoin job to the Boo and I, Jabuay, chew the Dutch pet to the Elak and Descent to the Zocorio Martina. Chuzama Korean, Zama is Zumba, so to let the little laugh, Pijita Hansi or Marina, so 2 day tuna, Hingich and any relay. That just was to a two days that I are Zanga and touch a babuet, so the mine ban is to add that you pachute and the Tamatanya and Chikugers.
So, and then as for the water that you offer, you know, they say there's all these great qualities about Tibetan water. It has these 8 great qualities and all this thing. We don't need to get into that. Anyway, the point is that you want to offer clean water. So like the same water that you would drink. And we're not saying anything greater than that. But if you have special water that you drink, you want to offer that and not like the basic water or something like that. You want to offer like good water is the point.
The go Tajiki aunt and Debedi Nero Yamlich Namando, the drink mobile Yena pay our body, the Katemewaina, the answers to Chuchi Pit and the Inja Pika and I and the Pika.
And so then it is a tradition, like for us in the nunnery, for example, in our monastery, you know, a lot of us just make water offerings every day. But if we're doing a special practice, like if I'm doing like some more intense practice on Ngondro or some other practice, for example, that it's pretty traditional for us to set up the full offerings. And it's not that you just do water all the time and then put these up only when you're doing a special practice. If you have them, it's nice to put them up all the time. But we will especially set them up if we're doing like a retreat or some kind of more intense practice like that.
And the choose Sumbo and so in the Mataba Georgia is a Georgia, some say him, but mental tantinity has said is in the Hashuris.
And then if we're setting up the 7 or 8 offerings like this, then this first 2 bowls and then the 6th bowl here all have water in them. And so we'll change those out every day. We'll empty them and clean them out every day and then refill them in the morning. But the rest, the flowers, incense, lamp, food, and the musical instrument, those will all stay throughout the whole retreat. We don't change those out every day.
Dormata zonali hiam titi nyechete tini joja margaresina samsam chu hiam gire samsam chu samni tin tsa hiam hi tsa lu ni ha ha ra ti samde bena nyamba chik deni nyamba chik de mato partu titi nyechete joja mare ya te ko samde ge jina misajuris.
So then there's also a different situation where if you're doing a approach stage mantra retreat on a deity practice, then often what will happen is you'll have a different kind of setup where these are kept inside of like often what we have like in the retreat center, for example, is like a kind of a cabinet of sorts with like a glass thing in it, and then you put the offerings actually inside of that. And then instead of the water in these, sometimes we'll put ca. So instead of the water, we put salt, because you don't change out any of these offerings until you complete your mantra accumulation, which could take weeks or months, you know? So those just stay like that throughout that whole mantra accumulation. So that is a particular circumstance if someone was doing, like, for example, the approach stage mantra accumulation for their 3 roots deities or something like that. So these offerings, as well as the men, medicine, rakta, and torma, are all like inside of the case and not out on the altar. Yeah. So then I've shown you these 7-fold offerings, but then also there's quite a bit to say about what you would do when you're just offering water. Okay, so what you do is that at night you would dump out the water from each one and wipe them out really well, and then put them face down, upside down on the altar at night. And then in the morning you stack them all like this and put some water only in the top one at first. So then you pour most of the water from the first one into the second one. It's not empty, there's still just a little water in the bottom. Then you set it out. Then you do it with the second one. You set that one out. So the reason for doing this in the way that I'm showing you, is that it's said that setting the bowls all out empty is setting up like a bad interdependent circumstance for like a empty offering, that kind of thing. So there's a little story I can tell you about this.
Ani tachi konsam zola tachi lama marwa dila nyewa chigyo yere samni tini di sang chimbo ji nye ni ta sang da rute te sang da kuni lama marwa pura te lama marwa yi te sang de shen dung ro di zamba te sang de pekke ya hoyora te ye be che nyame zo ya ho che tini be huma kera dan te ji ongere de ina kira tini di chowa de de yo yongere sa kare sa sang da tongpa pi hara ti tem de tende chen sung ji du se.
So when Milarepa was studying with his teacher Marpa, he was going off begging for food throughout the day because he was very poor, and he eventually got some grains, and he thought, okay, with these grains that I want to offer, like some barley, I would also like to offer like a nice like copper vessel. But when he made the offering, he gave them the vessel empty, and so Marpa he kind of tapped the side of the pot, and it made a really beautiful sound. And he said, this is a great sign that you're going to become quite renowned in the world. But there's a bit of a bad interdependence here that you made at the offering of an empty vessel. So maybe you're going to have some kind of like, issues in terms of your like sustenance. Yeah. So the reason why we do this, pouring from the top down, is so that when we set them all out, they each have a little bit of water in them when we set them out, that then we will top off, but it's so that you don't set out empty offering bowls.
paruk ti zole tini de janni den de zo penne de tu hyo me la gi du se ti de paruk de tru to se hyonga de den de do ja sho wo de se he du se.
And so then when you set them out, you don't want them to be touching. And it said that like the width of a grain is about the size for these small bowls.
Den de je ko chama pa ke pa la wo chen ni ti na la da je ngo che pa de luk do de ya de ni ji be lamzang chu de bombo do so ji lu ge ma ba tang ba chu de thao do lu ti yi ma li de bombi do je ti thama de la chung chung do je shun ra ma na wo che yang tu ma ra den de je ni bu go de da den zo ji na la hia do se be ja so na de.
And then also in the text that describe how to make the offerings, it said that you shouldn't just pour the water aggressively into the bowl, but you should start with a very narrow stream and then a little bit more full and then end with a very narrow stream like that.
Tendedo tipo putita chepa de buligapsu tijitani chepa de buligapsu da chepa yi tende mambo de kyoya du de na tab de wo che kanje ko indi zamba de ni de om a hun de ni de chepa de buligapsu om a hun se de kyo ni hana de ni de tugidus.
So there are many things that people might recite when they're making these offerings, but the most simple one that I think is easiest for everyone to use is just to recite Om Ahong again and again as you're making your offerings.
Tati yina tino Om Ahong de la harere sina ta Om di tinga zo pena sheba dinza jikdo pu yena ya ani de pa ji korangi Om di chele do de ni sheba de pa pe mambo de pa pendo e de jikseres.
So then the function, you could say, of the syllables of Om Ahong is like, let's say you're just filling one set of 7 bowls. With the syllable Om, it increases the kind of magnitude of the offerings.
Ini di Om A di dini ya pena azo jitan puye de azo chuji puye na ya tan de pen di dingo do le dona di ni di buye ngewo de pe de ko sambo le ba YouTube yores.
And then with A, it is kind of taking whatever we've offered and making it most excellent. It said that it turns it into the nature of nectar or amrita with the syllable A.
Dini di hung dini di taji chiba di layang arang zo zangma mayin ba ta madak binge wo do yena ani di zo ba tak par chigi yores ta korang sumni yende do tende yores.
And then with hung, it said that any kind of impurities that are left in the offerings are transformed, or that the offering becomes completely pure.
Tere tachi dani ko chiba di zo buri kapso yang ting arang zo ji ta lakpa dang di zo ji ti yin na tachi so ya lang ni dang bo khande da so de chien che ti ji dong ba dang di zo ji lakpa dang di zo ji sangma tri je ti ko sheba di zo hyam, dini sheba di zo hyam za di zamba, ani sheba dong la pe pu, dini zo di doin le chak sum do za, ani yoga zo de la ya, ti zi do na ya, ani zo ji ta gom jai na da ya, zo molam jai na da, ta dini ji iyo de se da ina zama dini ji.
So, normally what someone would do is, before they're going to do their practice or their recitations or whatever, you would want to wash your hands really well, and then come and set up your offerings. And then after you set up your offerings, then make 3 prostrations to your altar, and then sit down and do whatever kind of practice you're going to do in the morning, whether you're doing your morning meditation or some aspiration prayers or whatever you're doing.
Ta di chepa de ta chungrim do dang, ta chungrim che, dini chepa buli gapsu bunzu do, ta tende jen do do, ta chepa bundang de ta tendangi, bundang de do tasa. Do ta ni ta di do chepa de kanzo buli gapsu ta chi kulong do je yang khare khu gore samya di koli ta di do ji hinas.
So now I would like to say, I talked a little bit about the stages of how to make the offerings and so forth and what to offer, but now let's talk a little bit about what's the point, like what's your motivation when you're doing this?
Ta chi chepa de zo ta chi zangma dan gyuya po dini dindo ya ka chi wore de ka chi yo na ni je yo de ta arang zo ji kulong de cha de se chepa de budi.
So of course, it's important to be clean, it's important to offer nice things, but the most important thing is the motivation that you bring to the offering.
Ta kulong nan zo dini ji 다 첸데 스고야 첸데 닥터시 잠바다 도나
Oh.
다 아야나 kozo mi hienbiya ani choba bugidu ani ngaya choba ji bugo sare chendaji mi lende che ya jo tinde do ina da de kulong no bata chayo mares.
So then when we talk about different kinds of motivations, like there's some who might think, well, other people make offerings, I guess maybe I should too. So just like merely like doing it because other people do or imitating others isn't really a pure motivation for making offering.
Gare da chikso tinde cheba busa ser tangu tinde zikpo tinde pa nyoche tinde da de do nang la chik cheba do pu tinde do chena ani mi ja je so li da chik ten che je do ra ya ta ko pe cheba ya bo pu tu da do na chik so li nyen ba si ko so mi je pe ko ya bo tu se de ta pa si de zam ba da mi zam ma de ke ta do yong ki de sam ni ani tinde da kulong kunna ya ani kulong de da kulong ya da chayo ma.
And similarly, if you're making offerings and you're buying all these fancy things like gold and silver and arranging them, like hoping that people are going to think you're a really good Dharma practitioner or like think good of you or whatever, that you want to be well known or something like that, that's also not a good motivation, not a pure motivation.
Ko chung chime jamji buna de ta ji thaja na la lu che ti ni ji bu ni bu in se tente de siri to ati mona jana ta peja ti na la hien na hyung ti na la gewa se de ngom na de ma se ro re si e ji ta ti ni de ko ji tente si ti zam pa ta ngso ngome de ngona dikpa de ngom go sa ringi ti ni dikpa ji sa ni sa de ma ti ni dikpa de kha sang ma ko se ro re si ran ting sa around the tendency to do anything so that's also when I same thing ni kinjo ali choba mai ba ani ji ko choba re that is ji che de to ti ta bi ya bodo insa maras mare be ni sita himda.
So then, and especially these days, everyone wants to take a picture of everything that they do and put it on the internet. And so, display like, oh, look what I made offerings of, look what I offered, look what I did, this and that. And in all the sacred texts, it says that if you show off the virtues that you've done, it actually diminishes the power of any virtue that you've done. And so if we want to show something off, we should actually show off our negative actions, because it's said by being open and honest about the negative things we've done, that's how you purify them. Mm-hmm. But by being open and showing off the good things we've done, it actually diminishes their value. So what happens for a lot of people is they're not actually making offerings with a pure attitude of making offerings to the three jewels. They're making offerings because they want to show off.
Ani sona me chok to so ti top ya ani so si jula yeve ti an dikba dan diba to jon e che to remando ani mili ji ngomso cheni tiringa chi puing ngi ma chi puing thanu chi puing se ma ja ngomge ji khon jumje khona yo maris.
So the whole point in making these offerings is not to become well known. It's not just to mimic or copy other people. The whole point is that we are trying to really gather the accumulation of merit, and by doing so, really purify all of the negativities and obscurations within our own mind streams. But otherwise, just trying to show off, saying I did this and that, I made this and that offering, and so forth, isn't going to have any real positive effect on our spiritual progress. So now let me tell you a little bit about what's the purpose of offering and what's the benefit of that. And so, when we have taken refuge, when we've really formally become a Buddhist and taken refuge vows, then there are also trainings in refuge, and those are things that we need to participate in, things that we need to think about.
jamdu domba di nangla dini di kunchok sumla dini di choba jim hajebi dini di bugo yese te kare do jresi na ta kunchok sumla dini ngarang so japsu drona dini sangje ji dini di sung hyakyo so nyamzu lana ni ngarang so tse di dang ta chimali dini dinde di zamba ta dona kare resi na ko cheba li trindu se pasiri do ta ngarang so jikten bingo na meji so so lipe cutting chembo ina de la pa ya kochi kanje lineage se gora ta te chap na hin cheni teni ngazo kares na jamdi domba na la ta te choba de tende inji pu go se de he dus.
So, in some of the descriptions of the refuge vows and in the trainings in refuge, it says that you should continually make offerings to the three jewels. And one of the reasons for that is, like, even in a worldly sense, it said that if people have been kind to us, that we should wish to repay their kindness. And so one way of repaying the kindness of the three jewels is to make offerings to them.
Tendam leji kiwi he ni se ta chosa diwa ta bila je da de tok de la mi chilap khon na le thap he temba mong ba hi wa cha se zamba ta ngarang zo ni ten dam bi he de tok ko na te tok ba ji ba la te thap ni ji bo yor se chi ka re re se na de ni chok sa ko ji re se so nam sok sa ko re chi ti ni ti lami lama le ta the ba che ni lami chilap ju kyo ta di ni la te ni
So, Drikung Jopa Rinpoche, there's a famous quote from him that says, to awaken or something like that, your innate primordial wisdom, you have to rely upon gathering the accumulations, purifying obscurations, and receiving the blessing of a qualified master. Any other method is a delusion, something like that, or is deluded. So the real only method for attaining realization is through gathering the accumulations of merit and wisdom, purifying obscurations, and receiving the blessing of a qualified teacher. So, less.
This is something around the Pena in chapter which in the Gina that the Nameto in the Matanga and the ko chungsa ni cheni tene ngarang zo ko sonam chok so ya de la be go du karesina sonam chok se de da ngarang zo ji gyapten ro ji mena de ngarang zo ji samsam mi gare ji beja ta ko theni beja ta gi ore ne mi gare nyamle chi go janne lo sum tende de chi gi ore de ani ji sem na la thengi ore de be ya ko ji che ina paruli tini game parche khan ru wa de yong cha ani de ta ma be de ma bo ji la de ong to anti zo ti de sona mi jap de me za tini ti re sen de sung du se.
And so, it's important then to start even from very simple methods of gathering merit, such as making water offering bowl offerings every day. And so, the thing is that we really need to be generating more merit. And this is one way we can do that. Without the supportive foundation of the accumulation of merit, then there are lots of us who sit around, we think, oh yeah, I need to study this and that text. I want to do this and that practice. I want to do a long retreat, like 3-year retreat or something like that. We really think that. But in the midst of thinking those things, then all kinds of circumstances and obstacles come up, and we never really complete the things that we think about. And it's said in the text that's because of our lack of merit, our lack of accumulating merit.
And tendeji mitizo kare dini di ya ji so peja do ta tendeji ni pe ta nyamle do je tendeji kanje to na kewa do che bo cha na ya ani semje mamboli kira peng modo ge do tende yong ya te da ani so na mi chok ki dini yap ten de me za re de si de zam ba de arang so ji ati da namba kindu ani ji ta sunam chok so si zam ba da yin jap ji bo da re si ki me de inang arang so da ji ko gom nyam le ji chen ya ji ro go na ani yin ji ken ji da ti ko ti sunam jap de ji go years
Got it?
da ji sunam chok
So,
so
yeah.
de ji go years.
So, there are even some who study a lot of texts, do some practice, become known as like a scholar or something and still aren't able to help a lot of people. And that is often also discussed as a lack of gathering the accumulation of merit. So I'm not saying that the gathering of the accumulation of merit is only done through offering water, but it's one way that we can start, one way that we can work with that. And so, if we really want to have success in our meditation practice, if we want to gain experiences and realizations, then we shouldn't ignore this. We should really pay attention to this.
아니 내가 나행이 추당마된데 나다 또나 가르나 가르닝지 하나 주 삼제되니 근적숨라체 세텐데 소세다 셈니 대바다 이제 권디텐데 쳐바보나 아니 근적리 해 니와야 요래 안 소소랑데 촉소에 펜도 요레스.
So then, also, we eat, most of us eat 3 times a day. And so we can also, and we should also, think of all of those things as offerings to the 3 jewels. So we can think we're offering them to the 3 jewels. And also, whenever we go out, if we see a beautiful flower or some really pure water or whatever we find attractive, whatever we find beautiful, we can also think, like in our minds, I'm offering this to the 3 jewels. And if we offer that with faith and with trust, then the Buddhas actually can receive those offerings, and it will benefit us in terms of perfecting our gathering of the accumulation of merit. And so then, it's also a common thing to, to make offerings, like mentally imagine offerings of things that are, that you actually possess and things that you don't possess, but just imagining to offer them. There are stories of people stealing things to offer them, but I think those are what are considered impure offering substances.
This is a bangazoji chepatizo food or the zambada, and so the senachi as a marsan, go cheparo pu. Ansem na la je pansem do senado jena denge wo de tin sam hada pichar te ko puna koran beti da te kujo sum la koran pesen ting ni pa ta le ro tang ni te pu wo res yang pansem yin puna de ji puna de gewa chung chung do sha do sa.
And so then also when we're making offerings, we should really try to avoid offering with any sense of what's the word I want to say? Like greediness or something like that we can't let go of the thing, like we're really reluctantly giving it, something like that. That if we give something reluctantly, that really reduces the amount of virtue in the giving or the amount of merit. So we really, if we're going to make an offering to the 3 jewels, we need to make it completely giving it up without any kind of sense of loss or covetousness.
The Batazo solid soyang zo do it in it, the Jibatar to your the here caress Nangaranzo, the that syrup coat on Mamma Banet, Saya activity bomb, but you already did Apache Balanzo tiki, top he say Yagi already, top he the lata, cotenji top, the sing jimpy top, the don't be top say, the ning book into jippy top say, the he or a he nane, the ning book into jippy top say, 아랑도 개와대서 쳐봐라서 그래 제조대서 상마디니 고디 똑자로 열었어.
And then, when we're talking about perfecting the accumulations, and then the second part of that of purifying obscurations, when I was saying before from that quote, there's something in purifying obscurations called purifying through the 4 powers. And those 4 powers are, for one, the power of the support, and secondly, the power of regret. Third, the power of committing not to repeat the action. And fourth, the power of the antidote. And the antidote can be any virtuous thing that you do, including making offerings and so forth. So like exerting yourself in any kind of virtue or gathering of merit is considered, the aspect of the 4th power, the power of applying the antidotes.
Ini di dati coba buaya use guna dela daji da coba busi use guna da dende doina ji karesena ani sosoli da ting denda di doina da dembe kudo ani sung tu dua dende do yena ani dizo dende jen hiam di dinli dende jen coba buye ji yore sosoli kusung tu dan dende jikdo mewa inaya yang korang di coba mikba cheni ta ko kunjo de pugi osam te korang yang tende ko pihan na yang ko diores.
And so then in terms of the objects to whom you're offering, if you have them, then you can have, like we have here, a representation of Buddha's enlightened form, that is like the statue, Buddha's enlightened speech as a Dharma text, Buddha's enlightened mind as a stupa or chitan. And so if you have those, then those become like kind of the offerings you're imagining you're offering to them. If you don't have them, you can just imagine that you're offering to the Buddha's enlightened body, speech, and mind, and make your offerings just imagining them.
Da 대바젤 배중고냐에 시와나 힌제니 디니디 고 소소리 이제다 대바에나 데에서 향에 메나야 고랑 소소 mik바제 부데나 그 소소 가와도니 가와다 집배나가서 소소 강바나라 데디단데 제바도 향제를 그래서 힘바 가자 갈래도데 삼삼데 땡쿠숨 두데도 인지겐데 향사도 편해요 마라 이나 소소 mik바제니 고랑 부향나
And so then the main thing is just having like faith and trust that, even if you don't have these things to arrange, or even if you're out in the world, like of course when you're at home, maybe you have this stuff set up, like you have a Buddha statue, you have some offering bowls, whatever. But the main thing is that if you have like that faith and trust towards the three jewels, then you can just make offerings whenever and wherever you are. You don't have to have all this stuff. Like when you're out traveling around or whatever, you're not going to have an altar set up, but you can still imagine making offerings and imagine the Buddha's enlightened body, speech, and mind that you're offering to them, and it's the same.
세와 주도 지라 남들 나라 도야 카도야 데 나라 코랑 저 속당 저 배치니 휴도스 데도 인디 잠바네 데고는 되게 어렸어.
So like for example, like we have two main kind of offering, what we call kind of monthly celebrations, you could say, called Sok or Gana Chakra on the 10th and 25th of the lunar calendar every month. And so there are a lot of people who will make sure that they never miss those offerings. And so that even if they're in an airplane and they're not going to be together with their Dharma center or whatever to do that, they'll still make that offering, do that offering ritual, like even when they're flying in the airplane. So yeah, it's the same, even if you're not in front of like an altar or something.
The saya ina dra so tungya ina drange wo kare ina tizo koran taji ko kati na ko chepa bujang chena ko ti ko so deres.
So if someone has trust and faith in the three jewels and wherever they're going and whatever they're doing, whatever they eat, whatever they drink, whatever things that they see or experience, if they continually use those as offerings, then they'll perfect this accumulation of merit.
Ya nga sukonda tene na samsam hiya kapsu tene be mazo chi ne changma tene ko torhyong ro ina ta pele se torma to te ti na la ye jo tene ko ken ro ina da kare ina cha jang tene ko chebali mu cheni tene ji puye tene dus
la yanji sonda
ta chi ne nga zo torma e pen ta ne do ne de ta ma ha ya ina pele ina de do che 아니 네 나라에 요당도 semje ro ramatayara tido samje ani chopali mije de puya de dus
nuju
o ne de ta
no de jikten kin de se vorbela
de jikten ne de ta ne
No. So also in the tantras, sometimes in tantric practice, we imagine that the entire universe, like the entire container universe, is like a bowl. And then everything in that, all the living beings that are in that, are like the containers, the contents of that bowl, and we offer that all as an offering substance. So then Tokusanga Rinpoche said that Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, he had a tradition himself that every meal he ate, he would take a little bit of the food off and put it into his pukong. It's a special offering vessel that we use for the Serkyam offerings. And at every meal he would put a little bit of his food into that and then use that as his offering as every evening when he would make his offerings. And it's also said that if we have the power in our minds to actually like make the offerings, then the 3 jewels actually have the power to receive them. So then there's different traditions for like how you set up the offering. So, you know, often if you're reading a text, a translated text or a Tibetan text, and they say on the right or on the left of the altar, they're not talking about your right or left. They're talking about the Buddha's right or left from here. Like imagine you're sitting where the Buddha is looking down. So if they say from the right, it means from looking at it from the left. So anyway, in some traditions, they'll say that you should offer starting from the Buddha's right, meaning our left, and then fill the bowls like this. And then when you take them down, you start from the right and go to the left. So that's how I've set them up here. And then in some other traditions, like the tradition from Rigzen Jigme Lingpa and Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, they actually fill from here to there, and then when they take them down from there to here when they're emptying the bowls. But it's not contradictory, it's just different ways of doing it. And so then in the Tibetan tradition, like amongst the Nyingma school, there's like one big monastery, and their ritual tradition is in a lot of monasteries called Minling or Minderling tradition. And then also in most of the Sarma schools, like the Kagyu and Sakya and Gelugpa, then they start from here, filling to here. So starting on the Buddha's right, filling to the Buddha's left, or our left to the right. Yeah. So then if you're just someone who's at home doing some meditation practice or even doing your ngondro or something like that, then this is just the normal kind of set of offerings. But otherwise, if you're doing some accumulations of the mantras and so forth, or retreats of the 3 inner yogas, then there are some additional offerings that are necessary to be set up. Okay, so let's take questions, actually. Yeah.
when you're taking it down, what's the method for that?
Ma duna kandre dugoresa.
Chupa didigapsu.
Lao.
Chupa tenji tendangi tikong hyamdang de chena tenda ma phi digapsu ya hyogan ni de chen ma phi ni ma phi thora ya hyamdi ni ya sin hyam kor.
Ani da chechik nang na ma to. De nang na.
So
So I would pour them like this, starting from the left to the right. These bowls are really small.
Yeah.
So now you're going to start from the bottom, back up. Just flip them over like this. La. Chudi ma card. Listen. So in the evening, like you take them down like this, and then you want to wipe them off really good. You want them to be like completely clean when you set them down at night. And then in the morning again, you'll offer them again first thing in the morning.
And did you say the mindrolling method was
starting from offering from this side to this side?
Stage left. Yeah, right.
No. So normally we start from the Buddha's right, offering to the left, and then take them down the opposite way. Minling di dochora. So Mindroling is the same way, but Jigme Lingpa and Jami Khyentse Wangbo's tradition is the opposite.
They were the opposite.
Yeah, so in Jigme Lingpa and Jami Khyentse Wangbo's tradition, you would start offering from here to there, and in the evening when you take them down from there to here.
Okay.
Yeah.